Hey LinkedIn, and welcome back to Business Unusual. This is a live show brought to you by the LinkedIn News team where we're talking as a community about the changing nature of work. I'm Caroline Fairchild, editor-at-large at LinkedIn, coming to you from my home office here in New York City. It's Thursday, August 6th, and here's a quick look at the top stories that are trending right now on LinkedIn. As the pandemic continues to hit the economy, some 23 million people across the country are risking eviction. That's according to the Associated Press. Moratoriums on evictions passed during the pandemic have expired in 30 states since May, and New York's temporary ban on evictions just expired yesterday. And while every state is facing its challenges through the pandemic, a fresh look at LinkedIn data tells us which industries are being the most stressed out during this challenging time. Restaurants and travel, media and design have all seen stress levels grow 20% or more since the beginning of the year. Finance, healthcare, and education are among the industries faring better. For more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. That brings us to the main story that we have for you today. Over 2/3 of offices across the country are now open, according to the results of a new LinkedIn survey out recently with Working Together, my digital newsletter on how the workplace is changing in a digital and diverse age. And the reason that all these offices are opening right now is because workers are feeling like they are anxious and stressed out about this reopening and what it means for them and their career. As you can see here, anxiety is one of the top emotions that workers are having right now amid the pandemic and amid the concerns. And workers are also telling us through this survey that 78% of them, they want their employers to create COVID-19 specific policies to accommodate office reopenings. These are things like wearing a mask, banning in-person meetings, and staggering commutes to the office to maintain social distancing. But while the stage of the pandemic is in different phases in different states, how are employers thinking about creating these policies? What if you run a global business? Joining us on today's show are two experts who are going to help us tackle this, both from a legal standpoint as well as a data standpoint. Marina Satalis, she is a partner at New York-based law firm Wilson Sonsini, will join us, as well as John Meller. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Domo. I'm going to bring them on in a moment. Before I do, I want to hear from you. How are you feeling about the prospect of your office reopening before the end of the year? It's a question that we put out on the LinkedIn news page just yesterday, and we want to hear from you too. Are you A, fearful for your safety about returning to the office, B, nervous and anxious, C, happy and excited, or have you been working in the office this whole time? Let us know in the stream your vote, but also tell us how things are going on the ground for you. The whole point of this show is to have a conversation as a community about fears and anxieties around what the changing world of work means for you. So let's make sure and get those comments in the stream. And with that, I want to introduce John and Marina and have them come onto the show. Hi, John. Hi, Marina.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you again for joining us on Business Unusual. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week because we're just seeing so many members on LinkedIn telling us that they are anxious and stressed out about this option to return to work right now. Marina, I want to start with you. What are the main policies? I know it changes state to state, but what are the main policies that you're seeing employers have to adopt right now to make sure that workers are feeling safe about reentering the office?
Sure. I mean, there is wide variety over what is required by jurisdiction. We obviously have OSHA, which is a federal law that has certain recommendations and obligations. Generally speaking, an employer is required to provide a safe working environment for its employees. But what that means by jurisdiction varies widely. It is absolutely a best practice, and employees are calling for policies to define when employees are to return to the office, under what circumstances, what screening measures an employer has in place to identify employees who may be exposed or infected with COVID-19. So defining and explaining to employees what they will encounter when they return to the office by way of whether it's temperature taking or a questionnaire or actual testing for COVID-19. The policy also would advise employees about what to do if they are positive or symptomatic, notification procedures, when they are able to stop self-isolation, which we can find from the recommendations from the CDC, and return to work. So there are a whole host of issues that should be covered in the COVID-19 policy with regard to when and under what circumstances to return, and how the business is treating employees upon their return, including safety measures, et cetera. In addition, we've seen many of our clients look for policies on travel And there are, again, wide varieties of requirements and recommendations from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of business travel and other travel. Telecommuting policies, what employees should be doing when they're working remotely. Policies covering the protection of confidential and proprietary information, which may have migrated away from the office, and so many of us are working from home. So these are all issues that can and should be covered by policies.
And I definitely want to dig into some of those specific policies on today's show. John, before we do that, Domo has a lot of data right now. We shared a little bit about how workers are feeling on LinkedIn about the prospect of returning to work. But what are you seeing on your side about what workers want to do? Do they want to continue to work from home? Are they excited about returning to the office?
Yeah, we're in an interesting position because, as Marina talks about the policies and all of these considerations that are happening for businesses and employees, you quickly get to a process issue of how do we implement these policies and how do we clearly communicate to employees and interact in a real-time manner with employees. And Domo is a high leverage data platform that pulls data in and exposes it in these ways so that we can effectively implement the policies that Marina talked about. I think we're seeing very similar situations. We run a workshop twice a week, and we've run 12 of these now over the last few weeks. And we're seeing a lot of anxiety. I think the data that we see is very consistent with what you're showing, where there were a lot of people that have been involved in these workshops that are just have varied situations. Some of them are very excited to get back to work because the situation that they're in maybe isn't as conducive to working in their home location. Others are very sensitive, very reticent to do that. So we're seeing a broad mix, and we're seeing people be very cautious about their approach.
And for those of you just joining the stream, this is Business Unusual, a live show where we're talking about the changing nature of work. I'm here with John Meller from Domo, as well as Maria Taltalis. She's joining us from the New York-based law firm Wilson Sonsini. We're talking about what workers should keep in mind as we're thinking about a return to work. Over 2/3 of offices across the country are now open. I want to say hello to Laura from Virginia, Maria from San Diego, Kevia from Wisconsin, Priscilla from Chicago, and William from Maryland. Thank you for joining us in the stream. Marina, we have a lot of business owners on LinkedIn making the decision right now. Should they open or should they not? From a legal perspective, what should their top concerns be as they're thinking about whether or not to invite workers back into the office?
I mean, the top issue is checking to see what the various levels and layers of orders and requirements and recommendations are that impact your business in its various locations, from federal to state to county orders to even more localized orders that we're seeing. For example, in California, there are a variety of Bay Area, Northern California, and Southern California county orders. The Santa Clara order differs from the San Francisco order, which may differ from, another county's order. So looking to see, where is my business located? Where do I have offices? And what applies? What are the applicable standards and requirements for me, from the local all the way up to the federal, and making sure that you're compliant and have your policies and protocols in place to reflect the requirements in your jurisdiction before inviting employees back. That's number one.
John, the concerns about return to work are very high, both on and off LinkedIn, but workers have concerns in general about what the future of work is going to look like as we may be working remotely for the continued future. How should employers be thinking about advising their employees right now who just have a lot of fears about what work is going to look like in the long term?
Yeah, and what we've seen, and we've been kind of involved in this digital transformation, wave over the last 6 or 10 years, and the COVID environment is, I could call it the Y2K moment for digital transformation. I mean, it has accelerated how quickly businesses need to move into the digital age and digitally transform, not just how they interact with their customers and consumers, but how they interact with their employees. How are we bringing data to bear to communicate to employees, just in very practical ways? Like, how are we doing temperature scanning? Where is that data coming in? How are we managing whether the office was cleaned? How are we seeing the data about when that was done last? Has it been done in floor 1, 2, or 3? At what time? There's just lots of information around this that I think will impact the logistics of getting back to the workplace safely and communicating with employees. But then you get beyond that, and you think about how digital transformation is just changing how agile a business needs to be. I mean, we've got to get data in our fingertips very, very fast. It's got to be real-time data. It's got to be from every source. And that becomes the thread or the fabric that helps an employer or an organization act in a remote fashion, because we all need to be on the same page, and data is the fabric that binds that.
And Marina, we're seeing through this survey on LinkedIn that most employees are just not bullish that their employer has this data and is being safe about a return to office. If you have a worker right now who, like 57% of the workers that we surveyed said that they weren't comfortable, that's saying that they're just not going to return to work, what legally should you consider as an employer about advising them to come in, even if they don't want to?
It's a great question, and it's one that our clients ask us often. And the way I think of it is, there are various categories of employees, and they need to be sort of thought of that way. I mean, you might have employees who have a disability, whether it's a physical or mental impairment, and they may be entitled to an accommodation. Their condition may be exacerbated by the current circumstances. You can imagine someone with an anxiety disorder, for example, and we're all anxious now in the context of COVID-19, and those people may be more heavily impacted. And so if a person has a disability, which again may vary by state law where you're located, what constitutes a disability, that person may be entitled to a reasonable accommodation to enable them to perform the essential functions of their job, which may include a leave of absence. It may include extended telework arrangements, for example. Then there may be employees who may not qualify as a disabled individual, who are high risk. The CDC has defined groups of individuals, and that definition continues to evolve, who may be at a higher risk of experiencing complications if infected with COVID-19. And that includes, for example, older workers, pregnant women, employees who may be immunocompromised because of an underlying medical condition. And flexibility is in order there with regard to those individuals. And again, an individualized assessment needs to be undertaken by the employer to discuss accommodations that those employees may need to avoid exposing them to, again, higher risk of complications if infected with COVID-19. And then there are employees who don't fit in any of those categories. And I think there are a number of those employees who just are reluctant to return to work, regardless of whether the employer is able, as a matter of law, to reopen the workplace, and regardless of the accommodations and the precautions the employer is taking in the workplace. Those employees can suffer an adverse employment action if the employer decides that they're required to return to work and they refuse to return to work. But again, what we urge our clients is to undertake an individualized assessment in all of these categories, and to see if there are accommodations that can be made, whether it's staggered shifts or more PPE, or changing the physical location or hours of time that the employee needs to be there, carpools, or eliminating carpools, or providing for rental cars or other modes of transportation. Understanding what the concern is of the employee and trying to address it before they resort to adverse employment action. Although that is possible for that third category of worker.
I'm seeing a question in the stream from Asin asking, do employees have a legal right to request to work from home during the pandemic? And it sounds like it depends on what category of worker they are and what accommodations employers may be required by law to make sure that they are feeling safe during this pandemic. I want to also ask a question from Jonah in the stream. John, this I think is a good one for you. He's asking, what technology should offices be adopting? How we organize systems and data right now is changing. How we speak to each other is changing as we're working remote, and say maybe one day in the office or working remote entirely. What are the technologies that you really think employers should keep in mind to make sure that they're having a finger on the pulse for how their workers are feeling productively and what's going on within the office and outside?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the technologies that are in use right now. I mean, we've seen, of course, video conferencing, things like that pop up and become much more prevalent. But a lot of the systems that we use will probably remain consistent. I think the key is, how do you get those systems to talk to each other? Because now with these dispersed workforces, it's just, I feel like even organizational boundaries are blurring. And this is something that digital transformation has been pushing for years, but the COVID environment is making it more dramatic. So your finance team needs to talk to your marketing team, to your sales team. It almost doesn't matter which organization you're in. You need to centralize around business issues. So it becomes the data fabric that is really key to helping those organizations see the same information and be more agile in how they approach issues. And maybe on a more practical point with COVID and the return to work, just simple applications like there's an application that Domo built called Safe Worker, which allows employers to communicate with employees and really try and amplify the transparency, because so much of the anxiety is driven by not having enough communication, not being transparent with your workers. And that's a two-way conversation. How's the worker feeling today? Are they coming into work? Have they done a temperature scan? And again, consistent with the jurisdictional requirements that Marina talked about, being able to implement these processes with an application like Safe Worker is just key to keeping that communication flow really high.
John, speaking a little bit about how data and technology can ease some of the anxiety that we're all feeling right now about returning to work. And I want to reintroduce the poll that we have for the members in the stream right now. How are you feeling about the prospect of returning to work right now? Are you A, fearful for your safety, B, nervous and anxious, C, happy and excited, or have you been working from the office the whole time? We've been polling members on the LinkedIn news page this week, and we also want to hear from you. So be sure to get your vote in, and I'll share the results at the end of today's show. Marina, I want to ask you a somewhat personal question, but it's something a lot of LinkedIn members are asking as well. We're seeing many workers relocate. They don't have to be in the office. They're getting guidance from their employer that say January 2021 is the earliest they'll have to be in. So they're just changing states and working remotely from somewhere else. From a legal perspective, what do employers have to keep in mind as workers are asking for this accommodation during the crisis?
So many things is the short answer. As employers announce to their workforce that it'll be more months and months and months until they are asked to return to the physical work site, and as we're hearing from our schools, for example, that our children maybe are not returning on a physical basis or will have some sort of virtual option to return. Some employees, many employees, are looking around and saying, do we really need to stay where we are for the next 6 months or so? Maybe they are concerned about the high cost of where they're living, or it's a cramped space now that everybody's at home all the time. Or maybe they just see it as an opportunity to go somewhere else for a period of time. And many people are going home, they're moving in with their parents, or they're just, again, looking at this as an opportunity to try something else, either on a short-term or a longer-term basis. And it raises a whole host of issues for employers who are kind of losing touch with where their employees are. So there are issues ranging from having to register to do business, where you have employees, to contributing to workers' compensation and unemployment compensation systems. There are differences by jurisdiction on classification tests for who's exempt or non-exempt, who's an independent contractor versus an employee. There are differences in minimum wage requirements, in frequency of pay, in how, the procedure for terminating an employee, for example, when final pay needs to be paid. There are differences in leave laws, in medical coverage. There are immigration issues to be considered if you have workers on visas, for example, who are changing location. Protected categories can be different in certain localities. There are tax issues in terms of withholding and other issues. And so there are many, many issues that are impacted. The enforceability of arbitration agreements may vary, the enforceability of restrictive covenants. You may have agreements with employees and have designated a certain law as the governing law, and that may change if the employer no longer lives in that state. So there are a number of issues that are associated with this new employee mobility.
Now I'm wishing that I made the poll of the day if I should relocate to my hometown in Idaho or stay in New York for the foreseeable future. Maybe next time we'll get to that. John, how is Domo dealing with this personally?
Well, we were one of the first enterprise software companies in Utah to move remote. We've got global locations, but primary headquarters is in Utah. So even globally, we made a very early push to move to a remote work, just out of an abundance of caution. And I think the team has responded really well. And some of the issues that have been interesting is, how do you maintain culture because so much of what we say we love about the workplace are the people we work with. And maintaining a high level of culture, a high level of interactivity is really key to satisfaction. So we've done interesting things around happy hours and highlighting certain employees. We've had happy hours where people are showing off their talents, or if they have particular hobbies, they spend 20 minutes and they do a stream of their workshop, for example, of if they're doing woodworking in their workshop. And it in a way it offers a little bit more intimacy, but it is a change of format, but trying to drive culture and stay connected through data and through these relationships.
Mm. Marina, we spoke a little bit about employees who are looking to relocate during this pandemic, but what about companies who have offices in different states? The pandemic is coming out in different phases across the country. How are you advising employers about what they should do on a state-by-state level and considerations they should make about employee accommodations as well as policies?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of tools available. I mean, and many of our clients, confer with us, for example, to find out what the requirements are in different jurisdictions. Some clients are working with us to develop policies that are applicable in all of the locations. So determining where you have employees and coming up with a policy that meets the requirements in all of those locations. And the key is to stay on top of those policies, because the requirements and the phases and going forward and moving backward, they're constantly evolving, as we all see in the news. Whereas we thought we were making good progress and moving through the phases, in some states that has stalled and they've reverted to earlier phases, for example. So it's a constantly changing process, at least it has been over the course of these last months. And so staying on top of the evolving requirements in your jurisdiction is important. Staying close with your counsel so that you're advised on what the rules are and how the rules are changing. And having, as I say, policies and protocols and a system in place to monitor those changes and stay on top of them so that you can roll them out to employees and make adjustments as the rules require.
And John, Marina's talking a lot about the challenges that employers face on a state-by-state basis, but in a post-COVID-19 economy, what are the big data challenges? We think a lot about job seekers here on LinkedIn. How are employers keeping track of candidates right now, and what should they be thinking about from a data perspective to make sure that there's equal access to opportunity as they can think about remote workers and not just have people who can come into the office wherever that may be?
Sure. I think you highlight a good point. It really heightens the need for transparency with employees. I think employees want to feel like their employer is taking this, of course, very seriously, that they're communicating with them, that they're doing the right thing in the right jurisdictions, in the right offices. You've got jurisdictional issues, of course, but there's also just think about the data. We've got a COVID-19 tracker on our website that shows where are infection hotspots, where are tests positive, where is ICU bed usage high, where is mobility higher than it should be. Those sorts of external data inputs are important to understanding just practically if a location should be open. And I think employees are going to look to employers that have embraced agility and embraced transparency and communication with their employees, and have embraced the fact that this is simply the new normal of work, and we're going to be in a hybrid environment. This is what we've heard in the 300 plus people who have been in our workshops, is that the primary thinking going forward is that we are in a hybrid environment, combination of remote and office work, for those employers that can manage it that way. So I think employees are really going to look for who has embraced that process and that new normal in a substantial way.
Well, it sounds like John is bullish that we'll be in a hybrid environment for quite some time. But before I let you both go, I'm going to ask you to both vote in the poll that we have for you and the members in the stream today. How are you both feeling about the prospect of returning to work? Are you fearful, nervous, happy, and excited? Have you just been going to the office this whole time? John, I'll start with you. How does returning to the office feel to you right now?
Well, I'm probably in the nervous and anxious category. If I had to vote there, working from home is nice. I've got 2 little kids and they're not in school, and that sort of layers on another layer of complexity to life. And so working from home has been a positive in that regard. Although I love the team I work with, and that camaraderie is hard to beat.
Marina, what about you?
My office is in New York City, which was a hotspot. I guess it's made, great progress, and it's a much safer place now. But I share John's thoughts. I mean, about being nervous to use public transportation, for example, and circulate in the city there when it becomes more populated. And I share, the benefits and sort of burdens of being home. I mean, it's nice to be home with our children and our families. But I certainly miss interacting in person with colleagues. Just leaving the house, and being in a different environment is something that I miss too.
I miss that as well, and I miss interviewing people in person, but I really appreciate you both joining me virtually. This has been a great conversation. I know I speak for the members in my stream when I say thank you for joining us on Business Unusual.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That was John Meller as well as Marina Satalis walking us through from a legal standpoint as well as data standpoint how employers are thinking about offices reopening during this challenging time. We asked you in the stream today how you're feeling about office reopening, and I want to share the results from the LinkedIn news page that we've been polling members across the country on how they're feeling about this. And it seems to be pretty much across the board. The prominent feeling by just a smidge is nervousness and anxiety, 29%. And taking a look at the poll results from the stream, you all are feeling very similarly. Anna, Mary, Terry, Dolores, Eric, Maggie all voted for fearful for my safety. Maru, Christy, Tamara, Forrest, Bala, and Linda are nervous and anxious. And David, Brian, and Paula have been working from home this entire time. We want to thank you all for voting in our poll and joining us today on Business Unusual. Tomorrow at 12 Eastern, my colleague Andrew Seaman, who hosts Get Hired, it's our Friday show for job seekers. We'll be speaking with jobs expert Adrienne Tom. He will be with Adrienne on the LinkedIn news page at 12 Eastern tomorrow. Be sure to check that out if you're searching for a job or want to know more about the job hunt process during this pandemic. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.